Right, well, welcome to today's meeting of the Standards Committee. It is the Thursday, the 24th of October, and 10 o'clock. It's lovely to see you all here, firstly, before we get actually onto it. It's wonderful to see you all here. It seems a long time since we were here before. But anyway, number one, apologies for absence and any substitutions. Mr. Ford.
Thank you, Madam Chairman. I can report apologies for absence this morning from Councillor Joe Henderson, and there's no substitute today. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Minutes of the last meeting. I'm sure that you will have read all the minutes from pages 7 to 56. And if you're happy to, for someone to propose and someone to second, I would be very grateful. Thank you, Councillor Alex. Thank you.
Is it appropriate now just to ask something from the minutes, or is that later on?
I'm happy.
Chairman, if you can ask the question, Councillor Oxley, and then we'll determine whether it's appropriate to do it now or it might be covered later on in the agenda.
Right. Okay. It was just page 55. What was the outcome of obviously the last meeting you had? There was an outcome, but if I'd be a bit clearer, the person in question, I don't believe has done what has been asked, if that makes sense. Do you understand that? Sorry, I'm not very clear here.
Chairman, shall I answer? Thank you, Councillor Oxley. I believe we can cover that off in the update at the end of the agenda, because the complaint you're referring to is on that schedule, so we can update you at that point.
Right, now, do we, having got a proposer of Councillor Alexander and a seconder of Councillor Talbot, are we happy to agree the minutes? Yeah. Lovely, thank you very much. Okay. Declarations of interest. Sir Alexander.
Chair, I would like to make not so much a declaration of interest on article number 2, agenda item A2, but I'm a member of the planning committee and I'd like that noted, please.
Thank you very much. And as a councillor on planning, I would like to do the same. Thank you. Any other declarations? Yes, Ms.
Thank you. Potentially item 5 on the agenda.
Thank you very much. Okay. Are there any questions on notice pursuant to Council Procedure Rule 38? No. Thank you very much. Right. So now we'll get down to business and item 5, report of the monitoring officer A1, independent persons recruitment, pages 57 to 100. Mrs. Hastings, thank you.
Thank you, Chairman, members of the committee and independent persons. So if I take you through the report to remind you of how we got to the current situation. So in November 2018, the current independent persons, all 4 of whom are here today, Mr. David Irvine, Mrs. Clarissa Goslin, Jane Watson, Sue Galone, are the current council's independent persons, and they were appointed by full council. Their term of office has been extended a couple of times, and at the annual council meeting in April 24, the district council decided for the first time for a period of time that the previous arrangements for the joint appointment of independent persons and independent remuneration panel members would cease. So in effect, they would become two separate appointments. So the purpose of this report is not to look at the joint independent remuneration panel recruitment. That's been going on separately in accordance with the delegation which was given to the Chief Executive and I. So the purpose of this report is to focus on the recruitment of the independent persons. The review that was undertaken nationally in 2019 suggested that the term of office for independent persons should be restricted to 2 years. And that was a recommendation from the National Review. My suggestion through this report, and that is following practice which has been adopted both here and in other councils across the country, is to not to go with that recommendation. The reason being is that good independent persons are hard to find for a start, and you tend to find, which is happening with independent persons locally and within the county and into Suffolk as well, that independent persons are able to become IPs for other councils as well, to almost become even more experienced, but they remain independent. They're not related to the district council in any way, shape or form, or for town and parish councils. So the first thing I wanted to highlight through the report, that the term of office, my recommendation to the committee is that it would be for another 4 years. So that's for something for the Standards Committee to consider. And that the current independent persons, I believe, should not be prohibited from applying for the role going forward if they wish to do so. But by going through a open recruitment process, we could have more candidates that would be interested in applying for the role at Tendring District Council. So therefore, if the current independent persons did wish to carry on, they would have to reapply together with everybody else who was interested, so that they would be interviewed together with others. I have provided within the report the proposed recruitment pack as well for you to give consideration to. It follows the same format of which we've used previously, with the exception that we took out independent remuneration panel information. Last time, the Chief Executive included a statement as an introduction, and that's shown on page 67 of your agenda, and there is a typo that we've picked up in one of the paragraphs. I am proposing for your consideration is to whether there should actually be a statement from the current chairman of the Standards Committee as well, so that you've got the balance of an officer and a member as well. So I was proposing that this time round something was included. I did put at the time and/or the monitoring officer, but I feel that if it was only going to be one, it should be the chairman of the Standards Committee. That's my view. And also, so you're requested through today's debate to give any feedback you may wish to do so on the recruitment pack. I just wanted to make a couple of points, that some of the documents are documents which are included in the Council's constitution, so we wouldn't necessarily be able to amend those because they are within the constitution, However, if there was any feedback on those documents, we could pick that up in revisions going forward. So those standard documents are Independent Person Protocol, which is on page 76. So that's a document which is approved by this committee, which goes on to full council for adoption. Also on page 79, you've got the complaints procedure, and that is another document in the Constitution, together with the terms of reference of the Standards Committee, which is on page 89. So, and the application form for the role of independent persons is something that we can amend. But I'm happy to take any feedback on those documents if you've read them and feel that they could be improved in any way, and we'll pick that up in our work programme generally as the Standards Committee. The last thing I wanted to highlight to you is that the practice that we have adopted at Tendring District Council for the last 10 years or so is that the recruitment panel for the independent persons will consist of a mix of officers and 3 members representing the Standards Committee. So if you want to proceed with that approach, which we've adopted before, then we'd be grateful if we could have some volunteers to be part of that recruitment panel. So that's the summary of the report that you have before you. So open to members to ask any questions and debate, and the recommendations are on page 58 of your agenda.
Thank you very much, Mrs. Hastings. Do we want to go through it page by page, or how would you like to do it? There doesn't necessarily have to be something on each page. We can just skip it, or do you just want to say what you want to say? Councillor Talbot.
Yeah, I'd just like to say what I want to say. Your second option. Lisa mentioned the reference on page 67 where in heavy type we're invited to consider whether our chairman stroke or monitoring officer should also make a statement at the preface of the pack, as in addition to Ian Davidson. I most definitely think, Chairman, that you, because this is going to, it's not Eddie Chairman, it's going to happen fairly immediately, that you should be invited because of your position as chairman of this committee to make a preface statement to the actual pack in the same way as the chief executive have, to show the member involvement in what's being discussed. So I'd like to actually move among my colleagues that we do ask our chairman to preface the document along with the chief executive and make a statement on behalf of the committee.
Thank you very much. Yes. Thank you very much. Right. Sorry, Councillor.
Thank you, Chair. Well, once again, the monitoring officer has sort of whipped the rug from beneath me after spending hours reading through the government legislation on this, and it is somewhat in depth. But I think the one thing that we need to make very clear is the invaluable role that our independents give up your valuable time and serve us. I don't, in my wildest dreams, conceive that there will be queues of people going down the steps of the town hall wishing to become independents and working within us. So the idea put forward that the interview panel should also be 3 members of the committee, I think is an excellent. And should I be called upon, I'll be more than happy to take up that role on your behalf.
Thank you very much, Councillor Alexander. Right. Sorry. Oh, sorry. Councillor Talbot.
Yeah.
Of course.
Thank you. It's me that usually complains. Can I follow up what's just been said by my colleague? I definitely think we should continue with that arrangement of 3 members. I think the appropriate 3 members, quite frankly, must include the chairman and vice chairman and one other member of the committee. If he is prepared to stand, then I'd like to move Morris to be the 3rd person. So that will be our chairman, our vice chairman, and Dan.
I think you're jumping the gun slightly. Yes, I think you're jumping the gun slightly, Councillor Talbot. Councillor Alexander was talking about the 4 independent persons as opposed to how many councillors and who the councillors were going to be.
Okay, sorry.
But if you'd like to say something about the 4 independent persons, you're very welcome to.
I've not had enormous experience of them, but a couple of meetings and a couple of bits of involvement, and they've been exceptionally valuable. That's all I can say. You can understand why they were introduced into our procedure somewhat 10, 12 years ago or more, and they're infinitely valuable. Let's be honest, that is an outside voice. They obviously have personal opinions of their own, but actually, in a way, that's what we want. We want somebody that's not so involved in tendering district council and the interests of the council that by accident you might be overlooking the interests of some other group or some other person. And I find our independent people are infinitely valuable. Let me just say that.
Thank you very much, Councillor Talbot. Who would like to... no, Councillor Oxley first and then Councillor Alexander.
Yes, I'd like to literally back up what Councillor Talbot has just said. It's so important that we have outside bodies to represent. I mean, they are very valuable and I certainly respect every one of them. You know, they're not all on the doorstep, they come from far away, and as I said, I think they are most valuable and it's all about us working together. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Oxley. Councillor Alexander.
Now, just leading on from what Councillor Talbot has said, I think it's very important that we identify and recognise how structure works and why these are in place. Looking at the criteria by which you become an independent person and the interview process and everything, sitting here by sheer appointment, I feel somewhat inadequate to that. And we hope that we all live up to the standards that you require from us as well.
Thank you, Councillor Alexander. Councillor Newton, did you want to say anything? You don't have to.
Yeah, I just wanted to second what Anne Oxley said, Councillor Anne Oxley. Very valuable. Thank you very much.
Yes, Mrs. Hastings.
Thank you. A couple of things I wanted to say that I omitted from the presentation the first time round. It picks up on the debate so far. Legally, we don't have to have 4 independent persons. We're only required to have 1. However, in my experience of working with the independent persons, both here and in previous authorities, it is better to have a pool of independent persons because, again, you know, it depends on availability, depends on workload, depends on whether, you know, the arrangements which are set out through the standards framework as a whole, is that the monitoring officer needs to be able to talk to an independent person. The member who is subject to the complaint needs to be able to talk to an independent person. The complainant should have the opportunity to speak to an independent person. And if you've only got 1 fulfilling all those roles, then the question of independence comes in. So in my experience, it's always been worth having at least 3 for those reasons. So in one case, we do use 3 independent persons if we go as far as to a hearing. So that was the one thing I wanted to say why I believe we should still have 4, and I think that the committee endorsed that as well. The matter of the allowance, so currently, or until recently, should I say, the joint role for the independent person and the independent remuneration panel member was £600 per year for both roles. We haven't set an allowance as a council for an independent person, so it would need to be ratified by a full council going forward. However, I feel that we should still, my suggestion is that we still stick with £600 per annum for the role, but actually that's now just for one part of the role. So I'm hoping that it's seen as that it's more money because they're not doing as much with regards to they won't be doing the independent remuneration. So if a member if an IP wanted to be on the independent remuneration panel, they would get a separate allowance for that role. So it's 2 separate allowances now. That's my proposal. It would need to be obviously approved by full council, but that would be in the pack as, you know, the suggested allowance for that.
Councillor Alexander.
Do we have, is it your wish that we propose and second that at this stage to going forward?
Yes, it is in the recommendations, so I included £600, but I didn't explain that in the presentation. Yeah, and one of the other things I wanted to maybe suggest, it does go in the recommendation, which isn't there currently, is that we make it clear that that is plus expenses. So there are travelling expenses for our independent persons, and they should be able to claim travelling expenses as well. So we want to make that clear, and that's not in there. So, Councillor Alexander, if you wanted to move including that, I'd be grateful.
That is the reason why I raised that point.
Okay, thank you. Thank you very much, Councillor Oxley. Does everyone agree? Yes. Excellent. Okay, thank you.
With regards to the 3 members of the committee to be part of the panel, Councillor Talbot suggested that it would be the chair, vice chair, and also Maurice Alexander if he was interested. Can I check that that was included within the recommendation?
Alexander, would you be prepared to do it?
I can just see a problem in structure. If you, by grace of the fact that you couldn't attend, automatically you would step up into that position. So that could cause a problem because then that would be 2 rather than 1. I think to encompass the 3 suggested could be a problem. Maybe if we suggested 3 and a substitute moving on forward, or whichever way you think it would go, Karen, I'm quite happy to go along with that.
Okay, that's a very good suggestion, and yes, we will do that. So who would?
So we want the substitute now.
Yeah.
Would you be prepared, Sarah?
Yeah.
Yeah, I'll be the substitute.
Thank you very much. Must be something about 4 today then. Thank you very much. Is there?
I just wanted to say that I didn't suggest to the chairman or the committee that views of the independent persons were sought only because you might be interested in applying for the role going forward. I just wanted to make that point. I didn't exclude you by omission. It was on purpose.
Thank you very much. But I would like to add to what my colleagues have said and agree with everything that they've said about you as the independent people. You are very valuable and we couldn't do it without you. Thank you. Right, anything else that anyone would like to bring up in this report? I think the one thing that I did say was about a time frame, but I believe that may come up later. Yes, timescales, yes. But apart from that, I think that. Okay, thank you.
Chairman, in relation to your question on timescales, we will obviously set some dates once we liaise with the members who've now been appointed on availability, so we can sort of set those out to go in the pack when it's advertised. The current independent person's term, it lasts till the annual meeting next year, so we have got sort of 5 months really to get the new independent persons recruited to.
Thank you very much. So shall I read the recommendations and then? Okay, then that's fine. Okay, that's fine. Did anyone say anything? No. Okay. A2. If I can find my papers, which is the report of the monitoring officer, review of tendering district councils, members, planning code and protocol. Thank you, Mrs. Hastings.
Thank you. The first thing I am going to say in introducing this report is that this has definitely been a team effort within our service area, I'm pleased to say, and a lot of the research and the background work has been undertaken by Bethany with my supervision, so I'm glad to see that we've started to involve other members of our team in this type of work. So I wanted to thank Bethany for that, and also as well Joanne Fisher, who is our planning solicitor, has also contributed to the draft document as well. So it is a team effort that you have before you. Just a little bit of background is that this committee looks at the planning probity protocol for tendering district council, and we have previously adopted the structure and the format which is suggested by lawyers in local government. And when we as an organisation started to review the guidance which was coming out by the Local Government Association on probity and planning, and guidance that was being suggested by the Planning Advisory Service, we considered as an organisation that maybe we should have a look at different approaches. That wasn't necessarily to say that the format and the structure that we had was wrong. You know, it's just there are different ways of doing things and saying things. So the committee requested that piece of work to be undertaken so that we reviewed what the best practice which was out there nationally, and then we sort of pulled it together, as it were, to produce a suggested planning probity protocol for tendering to give consideration to. The work that we have undertaken so far has been only at officer level within the Governance Directorate, and we do feel that it is necessary to consult, if the Standards Committee approve the draft to go out to consultation, to consult members of the existing members of the Planning Committee. We also would suggest that we asked the planning officers to have a look at the documentation. Also the portfolio holder for planning on the executive side should be able to comment, and also send it to the independent persons to, if they have any views on it. It is very much the first draft that's coming to you as members, and we are, we're not going to be precious if you feel that there's things that we could improve or it's not clear enough. So I'm hoping that through the document you will see that we have tried to explain things so that the layperson and members can understand it better than previously. I personally felt that it was useful to involve Bethany in this piece of work, because Bethany's not a qualified lawyer, and actually sometimes as lawyers we can produce documents that we understand and maybe a bit too legalese, rather than the layperson, because this protocol is not just to make sure we do things right legally, but it's to make sure that members can follow it. It's to make sure the public can follow what our procedures are. Also, as well, in producing this document, we have not changed any, well, we don't believe we've changed any of the council's existing processes with regards to the way that planning matters are dealt with. So we've included the current information on site visits. We've made reference to the public speaking scheme. So this is not about changing the council's practices. It's more about the way it is explained as a planning probity document. But having said that and listened to me for some time now, you'll see that the recommendations are on page 102 of your agenda, and that is to note the outcome of the review that we've undertaken, subject to any debate and comments you may have, that the draft planning probity protocol as set out in Appendix A would go out for consultation to those individuals that we've referred to, and then we would bring back a revised document to this committee next year, early next year, so that it would go on to full council to be approved as well. So subject to members' comments, and I do feel this is something that would be worthy of asking the independent persons as well if they've got any comments on. It's over to you.
Thank you, Mrs. Hastings. Councillors, have you got anything you would like to say? Okay. Councillor Talbot.
I was only going to say, can you hear me? Yeah. Sorry, it's ringing in my ears. I just wanted to say, I think like the previous document we've just considered, they've been so well prepared, quite frankly, that they leave little room for any discussion, because they've gone through all the points that have ever been raised by members. I'm always, myself personally, bear in mind that I'm not a current member of the Planning Committee, but I was from 1999 to 2007 a member of the then committee. Totally different arrangements then. But I've always thought that site visits were something that needed more management. And I'm glad this does stress the point. Somewhere in this, I'm reading through it, I thought, blimey, that's just reading my mind there as I'm reading the document. Because there's always a danger, and it does happen, of the committee members there being divided from each other while they're on the site visit, with perhaps two members of the committee talking to this group of residents, perhaps, who won't let them go, while the rest of the committee's moving on. And that point is stressed in this document, that the committee should always remain as one, In other words, the council members plus the council officers should remain as one. And I think that's something you might say, well, it should be taken for granted, but it blooming well hasn't, you know, and it's not well controlled, and this sets out why it should be controlled. That's one thing I liked here. The other thing, and you might tell me it's not relevant to this, and if it is, well, fair enough. But one other thing that has concerned me over a period, and I suppose it's democracy in action, is the way in which when members of the committee have disagreed with the officer's recommendation, the applicant appeals, and at the applicant's appeal, the major part of his appeal is what our officer recommended to the committee that they rejected. In other words, particularly if the minutes of the meeting had already been published, I've known 2 occasions where I found myself almost hearing an appeal exactly what was said by the officer at the meeting, as though the officer wrote the script. Clearly the officer didn't, but the applicant, because of our democratic procedure of everything being published, is able to use that in that way. It's something that concerns me. I can't honestly think how you could stop it without depriving ourselves of the use of the democratic principles. But I'm just saying it does concern me to hear our own officers' reports being used by an appellant against the council's decision made by the members to pay, usually of course in these cases to reject an application, only to find that the biggest case being built against them is the one our officer used. I just mentioned that. It might not be relevant to this meeting, but it certainly is a concern that I've had, and I've been to a number of appeals over the years and had the privilege of speaking before the committee on behalf of my parish. But I just express that concern. Thank you, Chairman.
Councillor Talbot. Councillor Alexander.
I think the first thing I need to say, Chair, is that we have a most excellent officer group with our officers in planning. They're diligent, they're understanding, always ready to discuss anything that might cause a problem at committee level. On the second issue, our chairman at the moment, I'm convinced that in her previous life was a shepherd, for when we're on site visits, you're not allowed to step out of the circle. And you know that only too well, Chair. So that is also, after the ghastly incident we had on the site visit some time ago. Okay. There are still issues, Chair, where people are trying to bring their own personal views into what we should be looking at as planning policies. But the recommendations coming from the officers now, that always, that very, very rare, there'd be refusal, and there would be an explanation for that. But the majority of them would be approval, because those have already been filtered out for us. So we are just following the principle laid down by the NPPF. And that's really important that we make that perfectly clear. Councillor Talbot, fear not, it doesn't work like that. But as I say, there is an element recently of someone bringing in personal points, their own feelings into the committee, and that was quickly rejected by the membership as a whole. But that's a need for training. Or maybe you shouldn't be sitting on the committee in the first place if you don't understand how to go through the planning policies yourself and understand how they enact with the general public. It's a horrible committee sometimes. I've often been now where people are busily putting a makeshift execution block ready for us if we make the wrong decision. But we have to make those decisions because that's what we're there to do, to follow the direction. We are governance, not officer, and we must be led by them.
Thank you very much, Councillor Alexander. Mrs. Hastings.
Couple of things I'll comment on is I'm glad the site visit information was useful. Interestingly, it's in the current protocol that we have, and I think the issue about a document being accessible and read and refreshed on, you know, is a good point, because, you know, it may be in a document, but if we don't keep reminding members about it, you know, there is always the custom of not following it. I'm not going to comment on Chairman Shepherd. Alexandra, as you said, I do think actually it's worth us looking at the wording on making sure we do follow the council's policies in relation to planning, and, you know, departing from those policies. So that would be worth just looking at, see if we've got that strong enough. And actually, I do think it's worth putting in the document that actually the role on the planning committee is a difficult one, you know, and it's not to be underestimated, and we do cover that in the training. But I just thought it might be worth, you know, if you was sending this to a councillor as to do they want to be on planning committee or not, you know, it's good for them to know what they're signing up to, really. So I thought those was useful. In relation to planning minutes, there's been quite a few court judgments over probably the last 5-6 years, I'd say, where the courts are not insisting but praising cases, or council, should I say, where the minutes are more detailed on planning matters, because they can then that is the record of what members took into account or disregarded. And much to committee services' delight, I did request a few years ago that we reflected upon what was coming out of legal judgments, and that we did cover what members raised and what officers' responses were, because that's a piece of evidence, you know. And you're right, Councillor Talbot, with any piece of evidence, it's either used in your favour or used against you, but it's still a record of what happened on the day. So I don't think we can move away from doing it, but, you know, there's always pros and cons, should we say, of producing detailed and robust minutes. But the courts favour having them, because it helps them in their decision making as well. So I don't know if the independent persons wanted to say anything.
No.
Okay, I'll go first.
Okay, Mr. Irvine.
I just wanted to say it's always good to hear that a new piece of legislation has been run by what you might call the Plain English campaign. Would you believe that's been around since the past 40 years, and it's still not sort of fully implicated in the country? It's the basis of instructions for even simple bits of equipment should never be written by an expert. This should always be written by the person who actually is learning how to use them, like a washing machine even. You know, you get these manuals that are half an inch thick. So I just want to compliment the council on being able to do that. It makes a big difference to members of the public, I think, and as an independent person, I would say I would cheer that on.
Thank you very much. Ladies? Mrs. Scaloni.
Thank you. I thought this was a really helpful document, and in particular the parts about predetermination and predisposition were really helpful, as well as always ensuring that officials are involved in meetings. The only point I wanted to raise was on paragraph 9.21 on page 120, which is about declaring interests. And it was that final sentence. I completely agree it's incumbent upon the member to identify and declare their interests, but sometimes it can be quite difficult to know whether it's a relevant interest or not. And I wondered whether you might want to consider suggesting that the member could discuss it with the chair of the committee if they were in any doubt.
Thank you. Mrs Hastings?
Thank you. I think that it's we should include that they members should be able to discuss the nature of their interest. I wouldn't necessarily say maybe with the chairman of the committee, but I would say that they should discuss it with officers to be able to provide them with guidance and advice. So yeah, I've made a note that to be able to do that. And thinking about it as well, we do include within the training for planning committee members quite a lot of information on interest, so we can make cross-reference to that here as well. So there's somewhere they can go as well to look at it. Thank you.
Councillor Alexander.
Thank you very much indeed for raising that point through you, Chair. When I attended this meeting, I approached the Chair and said I wished to declare a point of declaration that I was a member of the Planning Committee. And I would say, on balance, if anyone does declare an interest, they normally would run that by, because sometimes you don't need to. For example, a shop like Tesco's, I'm not mentioning them, or Morrison's, any shop like that, we all go there. So we don't normally would declare an interest if a planning application came there. Otherwise the room would be empty. So yeah, but thank you ever so much for raising that.
Thank you, because you don't always, as you say, Councillor Alexander, you don't always know, and it's better to be open and honest about these things rather than, you know, someone finding out afterwards that, in this case, that we didn't declare the fact that we were both on planning. In this case, you know, it could be anything. Okay. No other councillors want to say anything? No. So, shall I read the recommendations? Oh,
Chairman, sorry, just before you move the recommendations, may I respectfully request that at the end of A, where it says carried out by the monitoring officer, that we record and their team, so that it's clear that it wasn't just me that did this work.
right, if I read the recommendations, then if we can have a proposer and a seconder, please, after that. Right. It is recommended that the committee notes the outcomes of the review of the planning protocol carried out by the monitoring officer and their team. B, subject to the outcome of the committee's debate on the contents of the draft planning probity protocol as set out in Appendix A. C, approves that consultation be undertaken on the draft revised planning probity protocol. And D, subject to B, the outcome of the consultation be reported back to the Standards Committee for consideration prior to recommendation onto full council for adoption. Can I have a... You'll move it?
Yes.
Thank you very much, Councillor Talbot. Thank you, Councillor Alexander. Do we all agree? Yes. Lovely. Thank you very much. Right. We will now move on to next item on the agenda, which is A3, which is the report of the Head of Democratic Services and Elections. And this is to do with the Town and Parish Council Standards Subcommittee appointment of Tendring District Council members, which is on pages 125 and 126. Thank you. Mr. Ford.
Thank you, Madam Chairman. There's not too much I really need to add to the report, except to just to reiterate that every year at its first meeting following the annual meeting of the council, this committee is obliged to reappoint the Town and Parish Council's Standards Subcommittee, which is made up of 3 members from this committee plus 3 parish councillors who are nominated by the Tendring District Association of Local Councils, known as TDALC for short. TDALC have notified myself that their 3 nominations, appointments remain as last year, which is Councillor Frank Belgrove and Councillor Linda Belgrove from Arrowsford Parish Council and Councillor Danny Botterill from Little Clacton Parish Council. At the last time this committee considered its appointments to the subcommittee was in July last year, and the committee's decision at that time was to appoint councillors Oxley, Talbot and yourself, Madam Chairman, to serve on the subcommittee, and it is just now for the committee to decide the 3 members to serve on the subcommittee for the remainder of this municipal year, and the recommendations are set out on page 126. Thank you, Madam Chairman.
Thank you very much, Mr. Ford. One thing I did pick up from this, and I'm sure other councillors have probably noticed, I just feel that it's, you know, the 3 people that are on it, I just feel that maybe that it should come from different parishes. I don't think that necessarily it's a good idea to have, say, 2 people from the same parish council. It should be from the district so that you get a wider view. That's only my view. I don't know what other councillors think.
Sorry, I'd certainly agree with that.
Mrs. Hastings.
So currently the terms of reference for the standards subcommittee states that you have 3 members from the district council. They are the voting members on the subcommittee, and we invite TDALC to tell us who their 3 representatives would be as non-voting members on that subcommittee. So we don't set any restrictions, as it were, to TDALC. However, that's not to say that we couldn't. It is our committee, it's Tendring District Council's committee. If we feel that the town and parish council representatives should be across the district, you know, then it's up to us as an organisation to put that in place. We haven't got that at the moment, so I think we would have to accept the TDAL's representations for this year. But you as a committee are more than entitled to make a recommendation back to full council that the representations from TDALC and maybe even from this committee should be more representative across the district. But that's up for your consideration. That's the way I would suggest that it could be picked up in the future.
Thank you, Mrs. Hastings. Any councillors like to say something? Councillor Alexander, sorry, Councillor Talbot.
I'd just say, you know, Linda's right to say to us that the arrangement is we asked TDALC to appoint 3 representatives. I really wonder whether it's right for us to sort of say, and they should come from, etc. You know, separate parishes it might be, or towns and parishes. But the fact is, if you don't know them, don't be confused by the fact that Frank Belgrove and Linda Belgrove are husband and wife. Don't be confused by the fact that that's just a wife coming along with her husband. Linda is very much a person in her own right. Before the appointment of police commissioners that we have now by vote, she was a member of the Essex Police Standards Committee. She was herself, for something like 10 years, joined me as the association's representative on the Essex Association. No, she's very much, that's all I'm saying. She's very much a person in her own right and not just a husband and wife team in that way. Frank, who's the chairman of the committee, is also the district's highways representative with the county. So, you know, they occupy different roles, although they are husband and wife. That's all I would say. I very much fear our interfering with what three people they choose to pick. But we could make it a preference. It will be preferred if, without making it a condition. It might be preferred by the district council if the representatives were able to come from 3 different areas. That might be fair enough without doing too much, but I wouldn't like to see the rules made that way. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Talbot, for your views. I mean, I agree with some of what you're saying, but I just think that if you have councillors that come from different parts of the district, then I just think it's fair. I just think it's fairer. I understand what you say about Councillor Belgrove and Councillor Belgrove. I know them myself, but I just think that, yes, I just think that it would be, I don't know how to say it really. I just think that they should come, I just think that the 3 people that come from TDALC should just come from across the district. And if it's, you know, having 2 from one parish, it's not, you know, but that's how it is. It's up to, no.
I would agree. It's not ideal.
Yeah.
It's opening it up, really, isn't it?
Yes,
It's
it is.
the
It is.
wife, not
It is
so much
opening it up.
husband and wife. I think it's
No,
the wider.
it's opening up. Yes.
Yes.
Councillor Alexander, I think you wanted to say something.
Actually, I wasn't, but I feel I ought to say something about this because, to be honest, my understanding of what you said initially had nothing to do with husband and wife relationships, but was a fair and equal share across our tendering peninsula to bring in all those who do have. We don't have a town or parish council where I am, so it would be nice to maybe to forward and possibly to add to seek further afield to find new and willing people to take part in such a thing. But the husband and wife thing, I think all individuals are free and not bound by a marital agreement.
Thank you, Councillor Alexander. Did you want to come back at all, Councillor Talbot? No?
Madam Chairman, before you still need to decide which members of this committee would be on the subcommittee. But if you wanted to include a recommendation picking up the debate, you could include additional wording at C to say to recommend to full council that Article 9.052 be amended to state that TDC would prefer that TDALC's 3 nominated members represent different parishes' town councils. Also, as well, I would say, I don't know if the independent persons have got a view on this, but you do also need to nominate 3 of you to be on the subcommittee if it needs to meet.
Would the independent people like to say anything on this matter? Yes,
Well,
Mrs.
having
Gosling.
dealt with complaints from different parish councils, it strikes me how very different each parish council is. So it's not so much where they live, but perhaps that if they've gone to their own parish council, they may think all parish councils are run in the same way. And it does seem that, you know, they can legally be run and feel very different from each other. So that would be helpful if different views were brought.
Okay, so first of all, if we have 3 nominations from the Standards Committee to go on this subcommittee, anyone willing to put themselves forward? I'm sorry, I thought you wished to speak. Okay, yes.
May I suggest that that we keep the 3 in situ if they are willing to continue in that role, plus a substitute if one is not able to make that. That's my suggestion.
Who would like to be a substitute?
I'll be a substitute.
Thank you, Councillor Newton. So then that means that it would be Councillor Anne Oxley, Councillor Michael Talbot, Councillor Anne Wiggins and Councillor Sarah Newton. Thank you. That does make it. And oh, sorry. No. Sorry, I'm just about to read the recommendations. Okay. It is recommended that the Standards Committee appoint 3 of its members to serve on the Town and Parish Councils Subcommittee for the remainder of the 24-25 municipal year. B notes that the Tendring District Association of Local Councils, TDALC, has previously appointed parish councillors Frank Belgrove, Linda Belgrove and Danny Botterill as their 3 non-voting co-opted members of that subcommittee. And C, recommend to full council that Article 9.05 in brackets 2 be amended to state that TDC, Tendring District Council, would prefer that TDALC's 3 nominated members represent different parish and town councils. And the 3 councillors and the substitute that are coming from the Standards Committee are Councillors Oxley, Talbot, Wiggins and Newton as the substitute. So, can we have a proposer? Thank you.
Yeah, I shouldn't propose because I'm one off. Doesn't matter.
Okay. Okay, Councillor Talbot proposed and Councillor Oxley has seconded that. Thank you very much.
Now can I say what I wanted to say?
Yes, Councillor Talbot.
I only wanted to say, but I didn't say it at the time, that the way those 3 appointees were appointed at the TDALC meeting, Frank Belgrove and Danny Bottrell were nominated and accepted, and they could not get another representatives to make up the three. And in the end, as is typical of Linda Belgrove and a little bit of her history that I spoke about, Linda said, oh, well, if nobody else will do it, I'll do it. So it wasn't as though her name was nominated and she was voted for. She filled a gap which was there. I just felt I should say that in fairness to Linda at the meeting. Thank you, Chairman.
Thank you for that information, Councillor Talbot. Right, we will move on to item 8, which is the revised work plan for 24-25, which can be found on pages 127 and 128. Thank you.
Thank you, Madam Chairman. The work programme for the committee is normally approved annually before the sort of start of the municipal year, and which happened this year like it does every year. However, due to the events of the requirement to have a dedicated hearing for a particularly long matter, that took up a lot of the Standards Committee time and officers in support. We also then had 2 elections as well that we had to deal with. So for various reasons, the work programme as approved previously has needed a review. Which is why, as officers, it is obviously due diligence to produce a revised work programme to you to approve, so that we can make sure that we're back on track. So we have on page 127 the items that will come into today's Standards Committee, and then we've got suggested items for February and April. So everything that was previously covered in the work programme is still within that. We haven't removed anything. It's been realigned. The only new proposal, 2 new proposals, they've come from myself, and that is, I do believe that having gone through a hearing, Standards Committee hearing this year, and we haven't had one for some considerable time, that it's always best practice to reflect upon a situation to see if the procedures are robust, and to see if they can be improved in any way. So I'm suggesting that comes back to this committee in February. Sorry, it could be that there was no amendments, but I think we should give ourselves the opportunity to undertake that piece of work. And I believe that should include members of this committee, those that took part in the hearing, the independent persons and officers as well, and different angles for officers. So I would suggest that we meet informally to have that sort of workshop to see what views are on the hearing procedure, and then report the outcome back to February's meeting. That's one of the things that I'm proposing. Also as well, I'm suggesting a review of the monitoring officer protocol for April. And again, the reason being, there's nothing wrong with our protocol. We regularly keep it under review, but within the last few months, there's some quite important documentation and guidance that's come out nationally about the role of the statutory officers. So that's the Chief Executive, the 151 officer and the monitoring officer. And I think it would be good for us as an organisation to reflect whether there's anything in that guidance which we could be including in our monitoring officer protocol. Sorry. There's also another piece of work that's been going on nationally, and that is looking at the sort of softer side, as they were, of the monitoring officer, if she's got a softer side. In that, you know, it's more about their competencies and what is required of them, and also looking at deputy monitoring officers and those officers aspiring to be monitoring officers in the future. So I think it's good that we look at those pieces of material and to see if which should be changed in any way. We should always be looking to the future, and so that we can almost have a job description for a future monitoring officer.
Thank you very much. Anyone like to say anything? No? Independent people? No? Oh, Ms. Scaloni.
Just to say that I do very much welcome the review of the hearings process, because there were a few points that it will be useful to reflect on, I think. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I'm sure then that can be taken up when we have our informal meeting, which I guess, do we do that before the end of this meeting or at another time?
No, we can just organise it.
Okay. Right. Okay. Can we have a mover and a seconder for this piece of work, please? Yes, please. Thank you very much, Councillor Talbot. Councillor Alexander. Right. Item number 9. Right. I believe Mrs. Hayes is going to present the complaints update on pages 129 and 130. Thank you, Mrs. Hayes.
Thank you, Chair, and good morning, members and IPs. It's nice to see you again. We'll go through now the Monitoring Officer Complaints Update. You'll see on page 129 the cases since our last standard meeting of the committee. It says on the bottom line that since the last update, 6 cases have been received. Since the time of writing, we've received a further one, so we're now up to 7. And then if I draw your attention to the next page, page 130, you'll see that in 23-24 we received 8 cases, and already so far in 24-25 we have received 7 cases. There's a brief update there on how the cases have progressed and ones that have concluded. It's worth drawing to your attention the increase in cases that we are receiving, and the amount of officer time and capacity that it's taking as well. This has also been reported to Audit Committee. We have spoken at previous meetings about code of conduct sessions being conducted, and we were looking at conducting those across the district and opening them up to all town and parish councils to try and encourage as many members as possible to attend. Lisa and I have done a summer roadshow, attending Harwich Town Council and St Osoph Parish Council to try and spread ourselves across the district. These sessions have been really well attended. They've generated good discussion between members and good learning points. We've conducted a dedicated training session at a town council, and again, since the time of writing this report, we've conducted a further dedicated session at a parish council. And as the roadshow has been so popular, we've had requests to come back, so we're looking at doing one more, which is to be confirmed once diary availability has gone through. There haven't been any dispensations throughout this period. I'm happy to answer any questions, as I'm sure Lisa is, and we can refer back to Councillor Oxley's question from the beginning of the meeting, if that's okay. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Mrs. Hayes. Mrs. Hastings.
I was just going to, first of all, I say in relation to dispensations, there have been three. You said, that's okay. There's been 3 requests for dispensations during the period up to the point that the agenda was published. However, I, upon request, gave Councillor Mick Barry 2 dispensations for items at Monday's cabinet meeting. So that was on the 21st of October, and that was in the public domain. So that's taken it up to 5 requests for dispensations during this period. The other thing I was going to go back to was Councillor Oxley's question at the beginning as to whether the sanctions suggested and recommended by this committee following the hearing that was held in May against Councillor Turner has been undertaken. I can confirm that upon writing to Councillor Turner twice, he has not taken me up on fulfilling those sanctions. We did organise a external organisation that could come in and do the one-to-one type training that was suggested by the committee, so we organised that. There was no response from Councillor Turner, and there's no response in relation to offering any apology. I can confirm that Councillor Turner still does not remain on any outside bodies or any other committees as a, not necessarily as a result of that, but full council hasn't put him on anything. And we're now at a sort of position as to what to do next. The current code of conduct that this council has adopted says that it is a breach of the code if you do not comply with the sanctions approved. But I'll leave it to the committee to say anything further before I comment.
Councillor Alexander.
Thank you, Chair. I do see this as a test of the code and where we stand within it and our role to administer what has been passed, previously passed, as a form of punishment or whatever you wish to call that. It was simplistic in its terms. It was not unreasonable. So my question, if I may, Chair, to the monitoring officer is, where do we go from now? What other sanctions can we put in place? And if they are totally ignored, it means that we become toothless, in effect. We have no bite, and therefore a part of our role is pointless us being here. We need stronger. We need to be given that support.
Councillor Oxley.
I totally agree. I'm sort of looking at page 103 at the top there, which says, promote and maintain high standards of conduct, develop culture of openness, transparency, trust and confidence, embed a culture of strong ethical and corporate governance. This is what this code of conduct is all about. I find, obviously, what has happened, yes, I understand this particular person is no longer on committees, but this particular person goes to full council and goes to full town council as well. And I just find, you know, this is a committee that should be setting an example how far do we go and where do we go from here? Thank you.
Thank you. Mrs Hastings? Oh, Councillor Talbot.
Yeah, yeah. It's a dog's dinner, isn't it? You know, let's be perfectly honest. It's one of the things we don't want to be discussing. But unfortunately, it's true. I know Anne is on the same town council as Nick, Mr. Turner. But the fact is that if it means anything, and our recommendations as put to the meeting by you, Anne, as our chairman, were very modest in many respects. It was undoubtedly true, and there was no denial of it in many ways, that the offences of which Councillor Turner were accused of were true. Even if one might say, well, that was that particular gentleman's normal way of behaving, and we'd grown used to it in our council meetings. He has been, I see Anne on it, it's very interruptive and dictatorial in some way, but that's that bloke. Him and I joined the council on the same day in 1999, and we happened to sit at the same table with our husbands and wives. And I always commented to my wife, did you notice he wouldn't let his wife speak? And, you know, so I've had a personal relationship and a feeling for Councillor Turner over many years. But the fact is that however long you've been here, however experienced you are, no individual member has the right to go roughshod over our rules and constitution. We just cannot allow that. I'm sorry, he doesn't give us any option. If he doesn't attend, I think perhaps rather than saying immediately, I'm trying to make a little gap. If he doesn't attend to deal with the recommendations of the disciplinary conduct committee that was held, then we ourselves will have to be charging him with a breach of the Constitution and a breach of the conduct procedure. I'm sorry to say it's such a terrible thing to have to say, but the fact is that we could not possibly have any authority ourselves in our own council if we didn't see that our very modest recommendations were at least complied with. Or otherwise, what are we doing here? We're wasting our time. So for the sake of the record, I hope you agree, Maurice, what I would say is that Councillor Turner be informed that the committee, obviously the information will come from Lisa, and I'll listen to what she has to say afterwards, but I would suggest that Lisa writes to Nick Turner and says that his non-compliance with the recommendations of the investigations held in May, 15th of May, his non-compliance was discussed by the Standards Committee who found the position unacceptable. I am now fixing for you a meeting either this or this day to comply with those recommendations. The committee further said that if you weren't prepared to comply, then they themselves would charge you with a breach of the conduct procedure. Now, I'm sorry, you know, it brings a lump to my throat to have to say that about a mate, but we can't duck our head. That's what we're here for. That's our business, and I'm sorry, but that's the sort of thing I'd like to recommend, Lisa, but not put in the legalese that you would put it in, but trying to at least make the position. It's not something anybody can say we understand. I don't understand it. It's not been ill, there's not been something else, there's not been some major disaster. It's just not complied, which, if you like, is quite definitely a breach of our procedures.
Thank you very much, Councillor Talbot. Mrs Hastings?
Thank you, members. First of all, I will respond to Councillor Alexandra's comment that this is a test. It is. It is a test. It's definitely that. I wholeheartedly agree with the sentiments expressed by Councillor Oxley and Councillor Talbot in the fact that the role of this standards committee is to uphold and to promote good conduct. You know, that's what this committee is here for. We are required to have a standards committee by law and to undertake the role that it did so in May this year. Prior to the adoption of the Local Government Association's Model Code of Conduct, it was not explicit that a failure to comply with any sanctions would be regarded as a breach of the code. That was not there before. This code, which the council now has been in place since May 23, and paragraph 8.4 of the Code of Conduct, which you've all signed up to, says, as a councillor, I will comply with any sanction imposed on me following a finding that I have breached the Code of Conduct. That's on the grey pages, part 6.9. So if the situation we have is that we've got sanctions from the Standards Committee that have Councillor Turner's been requested to comply with. To date he hasn't, following correspondence from myself on 2 occasions. So for a complaint to proceed against Councillor Turner for failing to comply with those sanctions would mean a complaint would have to come in and we'd have to go through the process again. Therefore, I do like Councillor Talbot's suggestion that something would go, maybe a letter would go from the chairman of this committee following, if it was moved, I would rather it would come from a chairman of the committee than myself, because obviously I'm involved in the process, but you know, I am reporting to you factually what has happened, and to date nothing has happened. So, you know, if you were happy to request the chairman of the Standards Committee to write such a letter in the terms that you've suggested, and then we see what happens as a result of that letter. Ultimately, if Councillor Turner decides not to comply, then I believe we will have to be in a situation of going through the process as to regards to ongoing breach of the code. And I don't want to do that for so many reasons, but I totally agree, if we don't, what's the point of that part of the Code of Conduct? And I think it also sends a very clear message, not only to our district councillors, but to town and parish councillors, officers, the public, that we mean business when it comes to upholding good standards of conduct. And I think that tendering district council's reputation means that we should do that. We are quite highly regarded, and we should continue to be so.
Thank you, Ms.
Sorry, Chairman. With that amendment, that the correspondence following this discussion at this meeting goes to Councillor Turner from yourself as Chairman, obviously guided, I would hope, by Lisa a certain amount, then could I move that and hope for support from colleagues as being the way forward? I formally move.
Can I just go to Councillor Alexander first, just in case. Councillor Alexander.
Yes, thank you, Chair. Right. We as a committee and indeed as a country are based upon the reasonable man and the interpretation of what we see as reasonable. We have looked at this case against Councillor Turner and we took into consideration in great depth the fact that there was some misunderstanding as to whether or not Councillor Turner was actually allowed to be at these committee meetings or not, by grace of the fact that he was receiving invitations via ourselves. We took all that into consideration. We listened carefully to the evidence that we received and also in mitigation what was given back to us from his team, and we came to a conclusion. We based that on reasonable, and I believe profoundly we were reasonable in our deliberation and what we determined is a correct way forward, which is what we're discussing now. Here at this committee today, we have, all of us sitting at this committee, agree that the actions now are becoming unreasonable and therefore we need to take a further step. So moving along with Councillor Talbot's recommendation, this is exactly what I would have put forward had Councillor Turner not suggested that, and I'm backing that 100%, that we send the strongest possible message out, not only to Councillor Turner, but to everybody, that you cannot go around doing these kind of, acting in such a way, acting with such behaviour, and then coming before this committee who spent hours upon hours listening to deliberation on this, came to a formulation only to be laughed at, and I'm not going to be doing anything about it. That is the impression that it is giving, where it's the old adage where I had a parking ticket, refused to pay it, now I'm in prison. It's just do what you were asked and it would have all been over and done with. So I moved that with Councillor Turner, I seconded it. Councillor Talbot, sorry.
Thank you very much, Councillor Alexander. So, if we're going to move forward with that, so Councillor Talbot is moving it. I believe before you, Councillor Alexander, Councillor Oxley seconded it, but it's entirely up to...
Yeah, okay, I'm happy to second.
Okay, and Councillor Oxley is seconding it. Do we all agree that with help I write a letter? Yeah. Excellent, okay. We all agree. Thank you very much. Right. That is the end of the meeting. I think our next scheduled meeting is on the 5th of February, but there will be a meeting, thank you, Councillor Talbot, an informal meeting which the officers will get back to us on, which will probably be this side of Christmas, won't it? Which will be good because then it's still fresh in our minds. That would be really good. And I'd just like to say thank you very much to the independent people, to all the councillors and to the officers and all the work that they've put in to get us where we are today. Thank you very much indeed.